I watched my best friend, Dr. Richard Calloway, dedicate his life to his children and his work after he lost his wife 10 years ago, a man who had once stood as an unshakable pillar of strength. He was the kind of man who never let emotions cloud his judgment, the kind of doctor who would work through grief, exhaustion, and heartbreak without so much as a waver in his resolve. But no man is invincible. And when she walked into his life, I knew it was only a matter of time before she tore him apart. Her name was Lena. Young, devastatingly beautiful, a 20-something nursing assistant with a smile that could melt ice and a presence that demanded attention. I didn't see it at first, neither did he. But by the time I realized what was happening, Richard was already too deeply consumed by her spell. Richard told me about the first time it happened months later, long after he had already handed over his soul to her. He confessed it like a man on death row, his voice hollow, his eyes carrying the weight of a man who had been utterly ruined by his own desires. It was late one evening, well past the shift change. The hospital halls were quiet, the kind of silence that only the night shift knew, where time slowed and exhaustion blurred the lines between reason and temptation. He had been finishing paperwork in his office when she knocked, stepping inside without waiting for a response. "Long day, doctor?" she asked, closing the door behind her. He looked up, expecting another nurse, maybe an administrator. But it was Lena. She was out of her uniform, her curves wrapped in something that clung too well to her body. She smelled expensive, like vanilla and something richer, something darker. She stepped closer, perching herself on his desk, her long legs crossing so effortlessly that it felt rehearsed. "You always work so late," she murmured. "Always taking care of everyone else. But who takes care of you?" Richard wasn't a fool. He knew what this was, and yet he didn't stop it. Then she reached for his tie, loosening it just enough to make his breath catch. He should have pulled away. When she leaned in, brushing her lips against his ear, whispering things he had only dared to dream of, he should have told her to leave. A thrill he hadn't felt since his youth. He was a man again, not just a father or a doctor, but a man with desires that she met with a ferocity that left him breathless. That night, she gave him an experience he had only imagined in his most forbidden dreams. She awakened something in him, a hunger, and that was the night Richard Calloway ceased to be the man I once knew. What started as stolen moments in his office became an obsession. Richard had always been a careful man, a surgeon trained to handle pressure and risk, but with Lena, he was reckless. She never asked for anything directly. That was the genius of it. She made him offer. She told him she wanted more from life. She told him she wanted to become a real nurse, to be worthy of him. She cried in his arms, telling him she had no way of affording tuition. And just like that, he took out a loan, a large one, and paid for her entire nursing school fees up front. Then came the apartment, the car, the jewelry. She never let him put anything in his name. "For my independence," she had said sweetly, kissing him with the same lips that would later call his son her lover. And he bought it. Hook, line, sinker.
I still remember the night Richard called me.
His voice was different, shaken, hoarse. "Alan, I need to see you." I found him at a bar, whiskey in his hand, his suit wrinkled, his tie undone. I had never seen him like this. And then he told me. He had gone to Lena's apartment to surprise her after a long night at the hospital. He had bought her a necklace, something special, something that meant she was his. But when he walked in, the door was already slightly open.
Inside, in her bed, was his youngest son, David.
Richard froze, the reality hitting him like a scalpel slicing through flesh. And then she looked up at him, not in shock, not in guilt, not in remorse. She smirked.
"David, you didn't say a word."
He just stared at his father, his face a mixture of regret and something even worse, understanding. Lena stood up, pulled on her silk robe, and walked toward Richard with the kind of ease that only a woman who has already won the game could have. "You were generous," she admitted, touching his chest one last time. "But let's be honest, Richard. Did you really think I was yours forever?"
Richard said he didn't remember walking out of that apartment.
All he remembered was the suffocating weight of regret, the emptiness of his bank account, and the realization that he had given everything to a woman who had never even been his in the first place. The aftermath, The cost of loving a liar. The bank came after him. The hospital whispered behind his back.
The woman he loved walked away unscathed, with a nursing degree he paid for, a life he built for her, and the blood of 2 men on her hands.
Richard, he lost his dignity. He lost his reputation. He lost his own damn son. And in the end, when there was nothing left to take, Lena did what she had always planned to do. She walked away, debt-free, untouched, victorious. And Richard Calloway, he was just another casualty of a woman who knew how to play the game better than anyone else. Some men die in the operating room. Some men die in war. But Richard Calloway, he died the night he mistook desire for love. And the saddest part, Lena never even looked back. After that night, the night I met him at the bar, Richard disappeared. He stopped coming to the hospital. His colleagues whispered, but no one dared to ask. He had spent decades saving lives, but he couldn't save his own. I found him in his house a week later, a man unrecognizable. The Richard I knew was polished, composed, always in control. The man in front of me, disheveled, hollow-eyed, a bottle of whiskey his only companion.
The house was dark, curtains drawn. The smell of stale alcohol and regret filled the air. He was still in the same clothes from God knows when, his face unshaven, his tie undone, like it had never been removed since that night.
"Alan," he muttered when he saw me. I stepped over piles of unpaid bills, overdue loan notices, and discarded whiskey bottles. "You need to get up," I told him. "You need to fight back." He laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "Fight back?" he repeated. "I'd already lost." The banks came first? Richard had taken out a massive loan for Lena's tuition, thinking he was investing in their future. Now, with her gone, the debt fell solely on him. His hospital salary? Not enough to cover it. The car he bought for her? In her name. The apartment? Gone. The jewelry, the vacations, the luxury? All hers. And worst of all, the mortgage on his home was at risk. He had spent his entire life working to build something stable, only for Lena to set fire to everything and walk away without a single burn. When his credit tanked, when the debt collectors started calling, when the hospital started questioning why one of their best surgeons looked like a ghost of himself, Richard knew. And he wasn't just losing money. He was losing everything. The career collapse. The first mistake came in the operating room. It was a routine bypass surgery, something Richard could have done blindfolded. But that day, his hands shook. Just a little. Just enough for the lead surgeon to notice. "Are you okay, Richard?" He nodded, swallowing the bile rising in his throat. Fine. But he wasn't fine. And in the weeks that followed, the mistakes got worse. Slight miscalculations in dosage, hesitation before making an incision, moments of distraction that should have never happened. The hospital board pulled him in. I was there when it happened. "Dr. Calloway, we are placing you on mandatory leave," they told him, "until further notice." Translation? You're done. The last time I saw Richard, really saw him, was 6 months later. He had sold his house, moving into a small apartment, drowning in debts he would never fully pay off. The once proud doctor who had saved countless lives now couldn't even save his own. And that night, sitting across from him in his bare-bones apartment, he looked at me with the emptiest eyes I had ever seen. "Alan," he murmured, setting his drink down, "I used to think men like me were immune to stupidity." He chuckled then, a dead sound, a man who had nothing left to lose. "I thought I was in control," he whispered, "but in the end, I was just another old fool who mistook sex for love. I didn't have anything to say, because he was right."
Once word got out that Dr. Calloway was spiraling, the whispers turned to judgment. Some pitied him, others mocked him. A fool. He threw away everything for a young girl. He deserved it. His own children distanced themselves. David, guilt kept him away. His other kids, they saw their father for what he had become, a broken, humiliated man. And Lena, she was already gone.
Does Richard let it break him? Or does he make them pay?
Every man has a breaking point. I just found mine.
Part 2. My plan for revenge was methodical. I wasn't going to let them get away with what they did. This is how I took back control.
And for a while, they were right. When I walked out of Lena's apartment that night after finding my own son in bed with the woman I sacrificed everything for, I wasn't a man anymore. I was a shadow. I lost my career, my wealth, my family, my dignity. I spent months drowning in whiskey and unpaid bills, staring at the wreckage of my life. I could hear their whispers. Poor Dr. Calloway. He threw it all away for a young girl. He's a joke now, a cautionary tale. Even my own children abandoned me. And Lena? She had moved on to an even richer man playing the same game, leaving me in the dust like I never even existed. But you see, they made one fatal mistake. They forgot who I was. I wasn't just a fool in love. I was a surgeon. And surgeons, we know how to cut things out. This time, I was the scalpel, and it was time to remove the disease. I spent months planning, watching, studying, because revenge isn't about anger. It's about precision. I had nothing left to lose, and that made me the most dangerous man alive. Step 1, destroying her new life. Lena thought she was untouchable. After she drained me dry, she latched onto her new target, a wealthy real estate tycoon, older than me, richer than me, more powerful than me, or so she thought. Because I still had one weapon left, the truth. I showed him every receipt, every bank transfer, every lie she had ever told me, and just like that, her golden ticket vanished. He cut her off completely, leaving her with nothing. No money, no luxury, no protection. She was scrambling, desperate, just like I once was. Perfect. Step 2, making my son feel the burn. David, my own flesh and blood, he wasn't innocent in this, but he was young, arrogant, and stupid. So I did what any good father would do. I taught him a lesson he would never forget. I let the world know who he really was. I leaked everything, his affair, his betrayal, his involvement in my downfall. My colleagues turned their backs on him. His friends, disgusted. He was left in the same darkness he threw me into. And when he came knocking on my door begging for forgiveness, I simply shut it at his face. The final cut, ending Lena's game for good. Lena thought she could walk away clean. She thought she could find another man, another wallet, another life. But I wasn't done with her yet. I wanted her to experience true fear. So I set the final trap. A fake investor. A business opportunity too good to pass up. A meeting in a quiet, secluded location. And when she arrived, she froze the moment she saw me. For the first time, I saw it with fear. She tried to speak, tried to play her games, but I wasn't that man anymore. I leaned in close, my voice ice cold. You took everything from me, but you forgot one thing. I smiled. I'm a surgeon, Lena, and I always finish the job. Lena vanished that night. No trace. No goodbye. Just gone. Some say she ran away. Others say she never made it out of that meeting alive. As for me, I went back to what I do best. Cutting away the disease. I don't live in a mansion anymore. I don't wear the finest suits. I don't have the respect of the hospital. But I sleep well at night. Because I know one thing for certain. Some diseases don't deserve a cure. Some just need to be cut out. And Lena, she was my last patient.
Thank you for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Do well to leave your thoughts in the comments section.